today I will be giving you an overview of what research we do in the integrative physiology lab. And then I will be going more into just what the different students are doing. So we won't have a whole lot of time to get into details of any specific experiment. But the overall question in the lab is to look at which endocrine mechanisms are regulated by environmental changes to affect phenotype and ultimately fitness. So to illustrate this a little bit, we're looking at the effects of the environment. So the effects of the environment can be a physical environment, such as changes in seasons or temperature. And then the social environment is to do with behavioral interactions with other members of the same species. And how do these environmental changes affect the phenotype of an organism? We go into measuring physiological changes, specifically neuroendocrine changes, as well as changes in morphology. And so how do these changes in phenotype ultimately affect the reproductive success of an organism? So we look at a couple different levels of biological organization. Okay, so at the organismal level, we could be doing live behavioral observations. So we go into looking at, so these are little groups, social groups of blue-banded gobies that I'll be talking about in a few minutes, as well as at the organismal level, looking at the morphology, so how big a part of the body is, or the entire body, or the shape of fins, for example, and as well as looking at reproduction. So if you look really closely, these are actually eggs from a fish, and then the little dots are eyes of the developing embryo, and they actually wiggle sometimes. It's very interesting. And then we look at a different level of analysis where we do hormone measures, histology, as well as molecular biology. So we could look at how different genes are expressed, as well as what kind of proteins are expressed, and then the biochemistry of enzymes. So we look at the transformation of one hormone to another type of hormone. Okay, and that's regulated by enzymes. So thankfully, there won't be a quiz at the end of this, but this is the type of enzymatic pathway that I'm interested in. And I look at the conversion of hormones from one to the other. This is a diagram of cholesterol, which has a big side chain, and it's cleaved at different points by different enzymes. And in particular, I'm interested in these particular pathways. And we can actually do in vivo manipulations with pharmacological agents. So you can actually inject an animal with a drug that will block a particular pathway, for example. Okay, and so this is, you can't really see the fish, but there's a fish under the microscope here, and we're doing ICV injections. Okay, we can also do implants. Okay. So the two classes of steroid hormones that we're most interested in are glucocorticoids and sex hormones. So glucocorticoids, you could have purchased it across the counter, like cortisone cream. If you have a cut or some kind of inflammation, it's a topical ointment, and it's released by the adrenal glands. In fish, they have interrenal glands. Corticosteroids in humans and fish are, the major corticoid is cortisol. And it's the one that is the stress response, that regulates the stress response. And so it's used for stress tests, for example. And then sex hormones, well, the estradiol and testosterone are the two most common sex hormones that you may have heard of. And you cannot necessarily purchase them over the counter. You need prescriptions for them, except for those who don't. But both men and women have both of these hormones. but the relative ratios might be different. So these hormones regulate your reproductive behavior, but also what your sex organs look like. But for example, what's interesting is that estrogens affect bone health in both men and women. So now that I'm about halfway through, I'll talk about the current projects in my lab. And the first one is, so this is Alexander Wooding. He is about to defend his proposal next month. So stay tuned for that. His project is part of a bigger project, GEM3. And he's been looking at sex differences in the stress response of free-living redband trout collected from different microenvironments. So from high elevation, low temperature areas and low elevation, high temperature areas. Okay. And then one of his field assistants is Kaysen, and he is also been helping with this project in the lab situation as well as in the field situation. So both Kaysen and Melissa Rivas have been working on the stress physiology of brook trout. Another project here is Jeremy Starkey. He is a master's student, and he is actually, we are co-advising him with Dave Delahanty, and his project deals with looking at the differences in testosterone concentration in the gonad of birds. And so there is a size difference that you can see here. The left testes is much bigger than the right. And so he's looking at whether or not there's a difference in testosterone between these two. So these were all kind of the physical environment. And with blue-banded gobies, we're going to go into the social environment. So these fish, we go usually to Catalina Island to study them in the field. And this was our field crew from last year. There are a couple ISU students here. And we actually have a lot of fun collecting these fierce creatures. This is a gravid female. You can see her belly protruding. She got away, but it's a lot of fun collecting them. And we bring them into the lab setting. And they're very interesting because they live in social groups. And there's usually just one male in the group. If you remove the male, the most dominant female will transform into the male. So there is a variety of behaviors, aggressive behaviors that deal with hierarchy formation. These fish go back and forth. So this is Katrina working on that in the lab. And she's working on these differences in hormones as well as behavior. Shayna Vineyard is looking at the genital papilla, which also changes with sex change. Christina Wade is a new PhD student, and she's learning to use LCMS, and she's looking at neurochemistry. Jeremy Starkey is working on a paper as well. He's looking at the dorsal fins as well as hormones that are different in males and females. And then I'm looking at another project that I'm just starting off collaborating with a researcher at Villanova University and hopefully Kurt Anderson to map the neuromuscular regulation of male parenting. And we have some new students that are undergrads in the lab this semester. And I want to end with just talking about just a glance at the community education part of my work. And we love sharing our work with the public.